Chapters 43 and 44 of Love's Bitterest Cup. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gaige. Chapter 43. Wynnette's Strange Adventure. What ailed Wynnette? That evening, while the family were all assembled in the drawing-room after dinner, she stole away and went to find the housekeeper. The old woman was in her own sitting-room, joining the servants' hall. Mrs. Kelsey welcomed the little lady, who had already become a great favorite with her. "I hope I don't disturb you," said Wynnette, deprecatingly. "Dearie me, no, miss," replied the housekeeper, rising and placing a chair for her young visitor. Wynnette thanked her and sat down. "You have been over the old castle, I hear, Miss Wynnette," said the old woman. "Yes, and I came here to get you to tell me all you know of that ancient ruin. You must have been housekeeper here for a long time, and you must know lots about it." "Yes, my dear young lady, I have been here, girl and woman, for 50 years. My mother was housekeeper here before me. I was still room-maid under until she died about 20 years ago, and I got her place, through the kindness of the earl." "That must have been very agreeable to you, as you were so used to the house." "It was, my dear young lady, it was." "And you must know lots of stories about the old castle." The housekeeper suddenly became silent and grave. "And your mother must have known lots more than you did, and told them to you." The housekeeper looked solemn and reticent. "Didn't she, now? You might as well tell me. I am the niece of the earl, and my mother is his heiress presumptive." "Yes, I know that, young lady," said Mrs. Kelsey, speaking at last. "Well, then, you needn't make a mystery of the matter to one of the family, you know." "What is it that you wish to hear, Miss Wynnette?" "Oh, any story of the old ruin, so that it is a really marrow-freezing, blood-curdling, hair-raising story." "There is the guide to Enderby Castle, Miss Wynnette." "Oh, I know, but that contains only outlines. Outlines traced in blood and fire, to be sure, but still only outlines. I want a story with more body in it. Come, now, that story of the Lady Cunigunda of Enderby, who was the greatest beauty of her time, for whom kings and princes were vainly breaking their hearts, and who was immured alive for marrying a handsome soldier. Come, tell me all about her. That's a darling." "My dear Miss Wynnette, I know no more about her than you do. Not a bit more than what is printed in the guide. No, nor yet did my old mother, rest her soul." "But now, tell the truth. Does not the ghost of Lady Cunigunda haunt the round tower in which she was immolated?" "Not as ever I heard of, my dear. Not as ever I heard of." "But, Mrs. Kelsey," said Wynnette solemnly, "I thought the old castle was a venerable, historical building." "So it is, my dear, so it is. Nobody can gainsay that." "But, Mrs. Kelsey, no castle, however ancient and however full of legends and kings and princes and heroes and saints, can be even respectable, much less venerable, unless it has its ghost." "Enderby Old Castle has its ghost, Miss Wynnette," retorted the old housekeeper, drawing herself up with dignity. "Ah, I thought so! I knew so! Tell me about it, Mrs. Kelsey!" eagerly exclaimed Wynnette. "My dear, I cannot, especially to-night. Especially to-night." "Why not to-night?" "Because, my dear, this very night of the 20th of June is the anniversary of the murder of that poor young woman and her baby, when her spirit always revisits the scene of her murder," said the old woman, solemnly. "Do you mean Are you talking of the lady's maid who was murdered by the coachman, and whose body was thrown down the shaft in the castle hall?" gravely inquired Wynnette. "Hush, my dear, hush! Don't talk of it, or you may draw that perturbed spirit even here." "You know all about that tragedy, then?" persisted Wynnette. "My mother did, and told me, and people enough have seen the ghost in the castle hall on this anniversary." "Have you ever seen it?" "Hush! Yes, once, and I never want to see it again, so that's the last word I will speak about it to-night. Some other time I'll tell you all, but not now. Not while her troubled spirit is abroad. Hush! What was that?" "Nothing but the sough of the wind." "Oh, I thought it was the sob of a woman. I thought it was her sob. Oh, my dear, for the Lord's sake, drop the subject," pleaded the old woman. "I will drop it this instant if you will promise to tell me all you know some day soon," whispered Wynnette. "Yes, yes, I promise. Let a Sunday and a church service come between this night and the story, and I will tell you on Monday," said the housekeeper, whom Wynnette's persistence had brought to a state of great nervous excitement. The young girl then arose and bade the old woman good night, and returned to the drawing-room, where she found all the family circle about to separate and retire. Wynnette went to the room which she shared with her eldest sister. Odalite got ready and went to bed. "Have you done with the light?" inquired Wynnette. "Yes. Why?" inquired the elder sister. "Because I want to turn it down low." "But are you not coming to bed?" "Not yet. I wish to open the shutters and look out at the old castle by moonlight. I will draw the curtains at the foot of your bed, so that the beams may not keep you awake." "Oh, the moonlight would never disturb my slumbers, Wynnette," said Odalite. Nevertheless, the younger girl went and drew the white dimity curtains across the foot of the bed, which was facing the west window. Then Wynnette turned down the light to a mere glowworm size, and opened the folding shutters of the window, and sat down to look out at the prospect. The moon was in its third quarter, had passed the meridian, and was now halfway down the western hemisphere, and hung over the sea, above the ruined castle on the cliff, illumining the scene with a weird light. Wynnette looked down on the great square enclosure of the courtyard, shut in by strong walls of mighty buildings on all four sides, the walls of the ancient ruin being on the western side, directly opposite her window. The courtyard was as secure and as clean as the carefully kept interior of a barracks, and it was so quiet at this hour that the sound of the sea, beating against the rocks at the base of the old ruin, was heard as deafening thunder. But Wynnette's eyes were fixed on that row of ancient windows in the ruined hall, and looked like mere slits in the wall. And now happened to the girl a very marvelous event. As she gazed on these narrow openings, they became illumined from within by a strange light. It was not from the moon, for the moon was far above, and it would have to be an hour lower to shed that light. Besides, it was a dark red light, like nothing on this earth. Wynnette gazed and wondered and gazed. It was a steady light. It never wavered or flickered, never brightened or faded. Wynnette gazed and wondered and gazed, until, drawn by an irresistible fascination, she arose slowly and turned from the window, went past her sister's bed, stooped over, saw that Odalite was fast asleep, and then she softly opened the chamber door, passed out, and closed it behind her. In the upper hall lights were always left burning low through the night. By these Wynnette found her way down the grand staircase to the armorial hall below. Here also lights were burning low. By these she found her way to the great west door in front, took down the bars, unhooked the chain, drew back the bolts, and turned the heavy key in the huge lock, all so noiselessly as to make her wonder, until she remembered how well oiled every lock, key, bolt, and hinge was, to save the nerves of the invalid earl. She drew open the heavy doors and went out into the night. The courtyard was bathed in moonlight, except where the old ruin some yards in front cast its black shadow, for the moon was now behind it. Everything was as still as death except the sea that thundered at the foot of the cliff. Wynnette felt no fear of material dangers. She knew that she was as safe from harm as though she were in a fortress. She went straight across the courtyard, drawing nearer and nearer to the haunted castle, and as she approached it she gazed more intently at those luridly lighted loopholes. And then, oh strange, the light seemed not to come from torch or candle, but from spectral eyes glaring forth into the night and drawing her on with an irresistible power. Wynnette could not turn and fly. She was under a mighty spell. She must move on, until she reached the pile of fallen stones around the castle wall, and over these, climbing with difficulty and danger, still moving on, until she reached the portals. The great iron-bound oaken doors seemed now to be closed and secured from within against intrusion, yet she was still drawn on so powerfully that she pushed with all her strength against those mighty doors, but with as little effect as if she had tried to move a mountain, when, suddenly the door opened, a cold hand seized her wrist, drew her in, and the door closed. CHAPTER 34. At midnight in the haunted castle. A horrid specter rises on my sight, close to my side, plain and palpable, in all clear seeming and close circumstance. What form is this? Oh, speak, if voice thou hast. Tell me what sacrifice can soothe thy spirit, can still the unquiet sleeper of the grave? For this most awful visitation is, beyond endurance of the bravest soul, in flesh and blood enrobed. Joanna Baillie. Wynnette's blood curdled. She would have cried out, but her organs of speech seemed paralyzed. She would have struggled to free herself, but the icy hand closed on her wrist like a fetter, and drew her on. She could only pray mutely and hard. She could see nothing before her, not even the fingers of frost that closed around her wrist, and drew her on through the black darkness. Again she tried to cry out, but the sound of her voice died in her throat. Again she tried to struggle, but the cold hand drew her on with irresistible power. Where was it taking her? Perhaps to the terrible trap opening into the shaft leading down to the dread dungeon of the dark death, under the foundations of the castle. Oh, if she could only cry out! Oh, if she could only tear herself away from her horrible invisible captor! Oh, if she could but see where she was! But her voice seemed palsied and her limbs paralyzed, while she was drawn on through deepest darkness by an icy, invisible, irresistible hand. On, now to the right, now to the left, now up a few rugged steps, and now down and down into deeper depths of darkness, if that were possible. Once more Wynnette tried to cry out, but failed; tried to escape, but failed; strained her eyes to see, but failed utterly in all attempts. "It is a dream! It is a nightmare! Oh, if I could only scream so they would hear me and come to me! Oh, Father! Oh, Mother! Oh, Lord, have mercy on me!" her spirit cried, in her agony of terror; but no word came from her frozen lips. Down, 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 into profounder abysms of blackness. Where were they going? Under the foundations of the castle? Under the bed of the sea? To the very center of the earth? Would they never stop descending? Oh, what a fool I was to come here at midnight! Shall I ever get out of this alive? Oh, no, never! Oh, what a horrible fate! Will they ever find me or my body? Oh, no, never! How could they? Oh, my dear mother! Oh, my dear father! Whatever will you think has become of me, your wilful Wynnette? My whole arm is freezing from the clasp of that icy hand around my wrist. What is it going to do with me? But it is only a dream. I know it is only a dream. A cruel, deadly nightmare. Oh, if I could only scream! If I could only struggle and wake up! But I shall die in my sleep here, and they will find me dead in the morning. Oh, Lord, forgive my sins and save my soul! What was that? Suddenly the silence of that utter darkness was broken by a sound that became a noise, a roar, a deafening thunder, and Wynnette, in the anguish of her utter terror and helplessness, heard and knew the thunder of the sea against the rocks. But the air was growing close, fetid, sulphurous, suffocating. "It is no nightmare! I hear the sea! It is breaking in mighty waves over my head! Ah, my limbs are numb! My breath is gone! My brain is going! Oh, if I could only cry out once, 'Mother! Mother!'" Then the darkness and the coldness as of death closed in, wrapped around, and settled down upon her with the weight of the grave. And for the time being Wynnette was dead and buried to all life, sense, and consciousness. When Wynnette breathed again and opened her eyes she could not at once recover her consciousness. The shock and strain upon her nervous system had been too severe and protracted. She heard and saw as one half asleep. She heard the awful reverberations of the thunder of the sea. She saw around her blackness of darkness, relieved just in one spot, a few yards distant from where she lay, by a small fire on the ground, that smoldered in the foul air and cast a lurid light but a few feet around, and fell upon the face and form of a crouching figure squatted near it. It was a Rembrandt picture. Wynnette watched it in weak, dull, stupid despair. Whether it was a man, woman, or even human being, she neither knew, nor cared, nor questioned. Nor could anyone else, even in the full possession of their senses, have at sight classified the strange figure squatted by the low fire in the subterranean abyss. Wynnette was too stunned, dazed, and weakened even to fear it. And yet it was a dread, a frightful, a terrible form, tall and gaunt as could be well known, even in that crouching attitude, by the length of legs and arms. Its skin was like wrinkled parchment and clung close to its bones. Its face and features were strong and bony and sharp. The eagle nose and the pointed chin nearly met over the sunken mouth. Burning black eyes flashed and flamed under beetling brows. White hair, parted over the top of the head, rolled in silver waves down over shoulders and back. It wore but one garment, a dark red gown, with sleeves that only reached to the elbow, and a skirt that only reached to the knees. It was squatting, as we said before. Its knees were drawn up, its long, gaunt, dark arms were around them, and the great claw-like fingers were clasped upon them. The head was bent, but the blazing eyes were fixed in a burning gaze upon the face of the recumbent girl. A memory slowly awoke in the mind of the stupefied girl. She began to recall some of the phases of her night's adventure. When had it happened? How long ago? An hour ago? A day? A year? A century? How long, and where was she now? She dimly remembered when she died, and how she died, how the faintness of death crept upon her, how her breath went and then her sense, and then nothingness. But how long was that ago? She could not think. Where was she now? She could not say. One thing was certain, she had died, and she had come to a bad place for her sins. She was in darkness. She was in that awful pit of utter despair whose name she could not bear to breathe to her own spirit. And that thing by the smoldering fire was her demon jailer. Thus much was certainly true, she thought, and yet so dull and stupid was she still that she did not care very much where she was, or even wonder at her own insensibility. At last, seeing that the creature by the fire still glared at her, she tried to speak, and at length muttered the question, "Who are you?" "Nobody," was the slow, soft answer, in a tone strangely sad and sweet, to come from such dried and withered lips. "Are you alive?" breathed Wynnette, in fearsome tones. "Alive? Nay, babe, nor are you," replied the same slow, sweet voice. "I thought so. That is, I knew I was dead. But I thought maybe you and the other I thought the natives of this place might be alive," faltered Wynnette. "Nay, child, I am as dead as well as thou. We are both dead. But I have been dead longer than thou. Ay, many years than thou, I reckon, for thou cannot be older than 16 or 17, and I be 97. Ay, I have been dead a long time." The voice that spoke those words was as tender and plaintive as the notes of an Aeolian harp. Are we in the woeful place?" "Yes, babe, we are in the woeful place. You and I and many, many, many millions, and millions of others are dead and buried, and in the woeful place." "I feel as if I were alive, though. No, not quite, but almost alive," said Wynnette, first pinching her own arm, and then setting her teeth in it, and biting so hard that she only escaped breaking the skin. "That's a delusion, my baby. You are not alive, neither am I. But they are alive," she cried, lifting and waving her arm. "They? Who?" demanded Wynnette. "They, the victims of hate, power, cruelty, and despotism, whose ruined earthly tabernacles lie all around us like the broken shells upon the seashore. They are alive. They are the martyrs of love and truth, the martyrs of faith and freedom, of humanity. They are alive, baby. They stand among that great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and peoples and kindreds and tongues, before the throne, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. Ay, they are alive. But you and I, we are dead." "I think I understand," said Wynnette, who was beginning to regain her mental faculties, and to recognize in her surroundings some subterranean cave of the cliff or crypt of the castle, and her companion some harmless lunatic. "We are in a sense dead and buried, and in a woeful state. But where, in all this woeful state, are we now sitting?" "Don't ye ken, bairnie? We are in the place the tyrants call the Dungeon of the Dark Death. And the heaps of gray and white lime that ye see here, or ye might see, gin it were light enough, be the moldering bones of their victims. And the latest victim of all was my lass. But death could not hold her, nor darkness, nor coldness. She came to life and ascended. She is a fair angel now, one of the fairest of angels. But though she is alive and we are dead, she has not forgotten us, but she comes on this day every year and visits our graves. I always see her when she comes. I can see her through all the clods of the grave that lie so heavy on my heart. Mayhap you may see her too, baby, but I don't know, murmured the plaintive voice, as the old creature slowly shook her head. Does she come here?" breathed Wynnette, in an awestruck tone. "Ay, she does, and every time she comes she shows me how her body was murdered, and how herself came out of it alive. Look! The woman suddenly started up, crossed to the side of the girl, and clasped her hand and held it fast, saying again, 'Look! Listen!' and she pointed up to the upper end of the cavern. Now, by what psychological law this weird old creature impressed her own visions on the imagination of the girl, let the occult scientists explain. I cannot pretend to do so. But as Wynnette looked and listened, there came a whir through the air, and a thud upon the distant ground, and the form of a young woman and a child lay there. Wynnette tried to shriek, but her voice died in her throat. "You see her," murmured the old woman. Wynnette tried to speak, but failed. "Watch," said the crone. Wynnette watched, breathlessly, her senses reeling. The shape presently began to change, as clouds change, from form to form, and presently to arise like a pillar of mist, and take the form of a woman, young, fair, angelic, with an infant pressed to her bosom, and with heavenward gaze, slowly ascending in a path of light, which faded as she disappeared. "There, she has gone, and we will go," said the crone, as she tightened her grasp on the girl's hand and drew her away. No longer terrified, but awed, confused, bewildered, Wynnette allowed herself to be passively drawn away, and they began to toil up from the depths. Wynnette thought of Dante's return from the Inferno, when he saw the stars again. At length, more dead than alive, she began to realize that though they were still in darkness, they were creeping over level ground or a stone floor. They were stealing along a dark and narrow passage, as she thought, for once when she stretched out her hand at arm's length she felt the damp stone wall. Presently, far off ahead of them, she saw the faint glimmer of a red light. As they drew nearer to this, she saw that it came through the chinks of an ill-fitting door. When they reached the door, the crone opened it, and Wynnette recognized, with feelings of relief, the great hall of the castle, and knew that they were above ground. A fire of fagots burned on the flagstones, and burned more clearly in the freer air than had that smoldering, smoking heap of rubbish in the subterranean dungeon below. The beldame drew the girl toward the fire, where there lay near by a pile of rushes. "Sit ye down here, lass, and rest," she said, as she herself dropped in a heap upon the rushes. I want to go home," whimpered Wynnette, in the tone of a frightened child. "Nay, bairn, thou wants to hear the story of my lass, and none but I can tell it. Not yon woman up in the new castle, for she but repeats the lies she has been told, and she believes. None but I can tell the true story. Sit ye down, bairn, and hear." "But it is so late, I ought to go home," said Wynnette, divided between curiosity and uneasiness. "It is not late. It is not yet 1 hour past midnight, and thou art a brave bairn, and there be none to harm thee. Besides, I must tell thee the true story." Wynnette drew some of the rushes into a heap and sat down upon them. CHAPTER 44. Chapters 45 and 46 of Love's Bitterest Cup. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gaige. Chapter 45. Told in the Old Hall. "It was 50 years ago, my bairnie. 50 years ago. Earl Hardston ruled at Enderby. Distant cousin he was to yon present Earl Francis. What was that? Nothing but the flap of the owl's wing as it passed. Earl Hardston ruled at Enderby. A handsome devil he were. Tall, broad-shouldered, straight-backed, strong-limbed. His hair was black and glossy as the raven's wing. His eyes were black and fiery as the hawk's, and sometimes soft as the dove's. Ah, a taking rascal he were. His lady mother and his lady sisters lived at the castle, and were to live there until my lord should marry, when they would all go to Kedge Hall, the dower house of the widows of Enderby. Kedge Hall was no to be compared to Enderby, and so my lady and her daughters were no minded that my lord should take a wife. Ah, but they were wicked. Handsome jades they were, every one. Black avised, like me lord, but not one of them to hold a candle to my lass, though she were the hen wife's child, and her feyther the under gardener. Oh, but she were the beauty of the world. I ha' seen the Venus in the castle gallery, but it was no to be compared to my lass's form, and her features were small and fine and clean cut, and her skin was like the wild rose leaf. Her eyes were blue as violets, and her hair was yellow and soft and silky as the fringe of the young maize corn. Oh, but she was the beauty of the world. Everybody was in love with her, every servant in the castle, from the old bachelor butler down to the boy in buttons, which they called the page, was half mad for the love of my lass. Every laborer in the grounds, from the widowed gamekeeper down to the youngest stable boy, was half dying for the love of my lass. No, bairnie, she did not scorn any of them, not the lowliest. She had a smile and a gentle glance, and a kind word for everyone, even for the freckle-faced and red-haired young groom, who always had a cold in his head and a swelled nose, and used to follow her about like a dog, until he lost his place for neglecting his business. She was kind and good to all. Oh, but she was the angel of the world, was my lassie. She were sweet and tender to everyone. But she would had none of 'em in the way of marriage. That were too much to ask, she thought. So time went on, till my lass was 20 years old, and she had never loved a man. And my lord were 30, and he had never married a wife. One autumn, my lord had a company of friends staying at the castle, gentlemen friends, the lot of them. Sorrow a lady was ever asked to the castle barring it was some old lady without daughters, or nieces, or any woman at all. It was not my lady countess who would throw temptation to matrimony in the way of her son, the earl. Oh, but she was the devil of the world. You shall hear, my bairn, you shall hear. Among the company at the castle was one painter lad, which even the king made much of, so 'twas said, so fine was his paintings. My lady countess had noticed my lass, my Phoebe. One day she sent a lackey down to my cottage with orders for me to bring my girl up to the castle. So I obeyed my lady. We were showed to a room full of pictures, and images, and rubbish, which I soon found out was the painter lad's workshop. My lady was there, sitting in the only easy chair. And the painter lad was there, standing before a queer prop, with a picture on it. As soon as the lackey said, "The young woman, my lady," and shut the door, the countess looked at us without speaking, and then turned to the painter and said, "Here is your model, Mr. Fordyce," as if my Phoebe had been nothing but a bundle of lumber. The painter lad was an ugly little mug as ever was seen, but a great painter he were, and a civil man. He looked at my Phoebe, and I could see the surprise and delight in his ill-favored little face, and he bowed to her and handed both of us to seats. My lady frowned, and he blushed, and said something very softly, which I thought was asking pardon for his civility to us. "Aweel, bairnie, that were the beginning o' the end. Fra that day my lass went up to the castle every day, in obedience to my lady's orders. I do not know, I cannot tell when it was, or how it was, that my lord first began to be present at the 'sittings,' as they called them. Maybe he heard the painter lad praising the beauty of my lass, for, bairnie, though she was born and brought up on his land, he had never seen her, for he never showed his face down in such low places as his laborers' huts. So, maybe, he heard the painter lad praising her beauty, and for curiosity went in to take a look at her. But sometimes I think my lady countess planned it all, to amuse my lord and keep him at home. What did she care for a peasant girl's heart, or her soul, or her good name, either, if she could amuse my lord and keep him from going off and getting married, and bringing home a wife to send her and her lady daughter to Kedge Hall? Oh, but she was the devil of the world! Ah me, ah me, ah me! I did not know what was going on. You see, I didn't go with my lass to the castle after that first time. My lady's maid, an auld wife, always came and fetched her. No, I did not know what was going on. And why should I tell you of wickedness that is not for you to hear? No, no, I will pack the whole peck into a pint cup and make an end of it. Oh, such an old tale! Oh, such a common tale! It is heard in every hamlet, on every hillside. Oh, but it comes home to one when it's one's own child. Ah me, ah me!" Late in the autumn the pictures were finished, and the sittings were over, and the painter lad went his way back to London. And my lass stayed home with me, and only went out sometimes in the gloaming. I never thought ill. I used to go to look after the poultry yard by the castle stables every day, and sometimes, with the gathering and sorting of eggs and other matters, I would be kept at work all day long. One day I got on with my work so weel that I cam hame earlier than common, and there, in the hut, was my lord, with Phoebe on his knee and his arm around her waist. Before I could weel take in the whole, my lord had risen, and, with a "Good e'en, dame," he passed me and went out. And I sat down on the floor and covered my head with my apron. I could speak no word of blame to my lass. My heart, it was broken. Presently she came to me and put her sweet arms around my neck and said to me, in her ain sweet voice: "Minnie, Minnie, I canna see you grieve and not tell you the truth, though I must break my word to do it. Minnie, yon great earl is my husband and your son, and I love him as I love my life." Bairnie, ye may not think I were surprised at what I heard, but indeed I were not. I were very pleased, and that's the truth, but not surprised. I thought my lass the beauty of the whole world, and the angel of the whole world, and our folklore were full of tales of how noble lords, and even royal princes, did love and marry peasant girls for their beauty and for their goodness. And who so beautiful and who so good as my ain lass? No, I was not surprised, but I was proud and pleased. I only asked her the how and the when and the where, and when she had told me I believed in her, as I had a right to believe in her. But I also believed in him, as I had no right to believe in any man. And then she begged me to keep the secret, because she had broken her promise to keep it from everybody, and had told me from love of me. I swore that I would keep her secret, and I kissed her and petted her and loved her. And she said, 'Now I am completely happy, dear Minnie, as I never was when I kept a secret from mine ain Minnie.' Ah me, ah me! But there, she is still happy. I only am miserable. She is alive. I only am dead. But some time or other I shall come to life and be happy with her. Where was I, bairnie? What was I telling you last?" "Of your dear daughter's secret marriage with the earl, and of your promise to keep the secret," said Wynnette. "Ay, ay, and we were happy that night, Phoebe and I. And I hugged her to my heart as we slept together, and I called her 'my little countess,' my little countess. Ah, I was drunk with pride and vanity. Not for myself, but for my beauty and angel of the world. I could not sleep for thinking of her and of her grandeur. Only I did think that mayhap if the king had chanced to come by our way and see her the king himself might ha' married her and so made her a queen. And I did not care for the earl so much, but that I was sorry it was not the king who had seen her." Next morning Phoebe went back to her spinning, and I went to the hen house. I quieted down and began to go over the tales in our folklore, and I thought with uneasiness how King Coephutus, who married the beggar girl, and the other king that married the nut brown maid, and all other kings and princes and nobles who had married good and beautiful peasant maids, had wedded them in open day before all the world, with a great flourish of trumpets and blowing of horns, and flaunting of flags, in honor of the wedding, and all the neighboring kings and princes and lords and nobles invited to the feast. And here was this earl, who was neither king nor prince, and nobody but an earl, had married the beauty and the angel of the world, in the dark behind the door, as it were, and keeping his marriage a secret as if he was ashamed of it. I wondered what he meant. I thought if it had been the king who had married my lass he would not have done so. When I came hame that night I asked my girl how it was, and she told me it was from fear of his mother, who had set her heart on his marrying the daughter of a duke. The daughter of a duke, indeed! What was the daughter of a duke compared to the beauty and the angel of the whole world, as kings and princes would have fought for, if they had only seen her? But it was all a lie, for my lady countess, she had set her heart on his never marrying anybody so long as she should live. I thought the earl was unworthy to be compared with the kings and princes of our folklore, and I feared my lass had thrown herself away on an ungrateful earl, a mere common earl, when she might have married a king or an emperor if she had only waited until one passed by and saw her. But it was done, and he was her husband, so I would not say anything to set her against him. CHAPTER 46. A Dream Within a Dream. Ah, well, as the days and the weeks passed I got mortal tired of waiting for him to own my girl his wife, and take her to the great house with blowing of trumpets, and waving of banners, and flaunting of flags, and prancing of steeds, like I had heard of. What was the use of my girl being the wife of a great lord, if she had to wear a linsey gown, and sit in the hut and spin all day long, while I was away to the hen house? Why, none at all. Oh, bairn, it is such a help to my poor heart, telling you all this. And you believe me, don't you?" "I believe every word you say. Tell me more," earnestly replied Wynnette. "At long last my lady countess and her young lady daughters went up to London town. And now I thought, well, they are gone, my lord will take his wife hame to the great house. But he didn't, bairn, he didn't. Oh, he didn't. He was abroad somewhere, to France, maybe, or to Paris, or some other furrin country thereaway. And my lass gave herself up to weeping, and never showed herself abroad, but stayed in the hut. One day I laid a baby boy in her arms, and told her to be comforted, for that her son was the little Lord Glennon, and the heir to the earldom of Enderby. And then I had to tell my neighbors the secret, for I could not bear that they should think ill of my ain lass. But nane of them would believe me, not one. They laughed me to scorn, me and me lass. It is an old tale, oh, such an old tale, such a common old tale, only it comes hame when it is one's ain bairn. One day my lord came hame and heard the report, and a fine passion he was in with my lass and me. He denied her and her child. He pretended it was Andy, the stable boy she had married, and he scorned her, and threatened to turn us both out of the hut if we ever so much as named his name again. Oh, but he was the devil of the whole world. After that, in many long nights that my lass and I lay awake, we talked, and I got to know why the great Earl had married my beauty and angel of the whole world. First he tried to win her love without her hand, but my girl was good and firm. And then he grew so mad for her love that he took her before a priest and married her. One day we did hear that the Earl was to wed the Duke's daughter, and all the cottagers said I was a mad crone to think my lord had stooped to my lass. Ah, my lass! She was fading away before my very eyes, but not fast enough for my lord. One day there was a fair at Enderby town, and all the laborers on the estate and all the servants at the castle had a holiday to go to the fair. All went but me and my lass. We ne'er left hame in those days. We could no bear that any should look on us and scorn us. So that day I left my lass spinning at the hut door, and the baby was sleeping in the basket by her side, and I went to my duty in the hen houses. I had the old nests to clean out and fresh straw to put in them. I got done about 12 of the clock and came hame. But my girl was not in the house, nor the babe. I had no misgiving. I went in and waited for her. But she came no more. She never came again. When it grew dark, I began to be so uneasy that I went out to look for her, but could no find her. There was no one as I could ask. All the world was gone to the fair, and nane would be hame till late, maybe not till morning. Well, bairn, when I had walked till my limbs were ready to sink under me, I went hame and laid down, just as I was, on the outside of my bed. I was not asleep. Nay, bairnie, I was not asleep. I did no dream what followed. I saw it. My eyes were shut, and all the world was still, for it was long after midnight, and even drawing near the morning. But still it was pitch dark when—no, I wasn't asleep, and I didn't dream it—when I felt a light through my shut eyelids. I opened them and saw the room was full of light that did not come from sun or moon or star or candle or lamp or fire, but from a bright form that stood in the midst of the place and beckoned me to come to it. In an awe that was not a fright, I got up and went to it and said, "Phoebe," for I knew it was my lass that stood there with her child in her arms, and clothed, not in the white raiment of the blessed, but in what I thought was lovelier, a clear, soft, rosy gown that fell from her shoulders down to her feet. She had no crown on her head, but her silky yellow hair streamed down around her form like sunbeams. I knew she was a spirit. "Phoebe," I said again, "Phoebe." She did not speak, but holding her child on her right arm, she raised her left hand and beckoned me, and pointed to the door and went out. I followed her. She led me by ways I had never gone before, but have gone every year since that night. The same way I took you tonight, my bairn. The secret passage to the deep caverns under the foundations of the castle, the only way to them except through the trap door and shaft that runs 200 feet down in a straight line, a way that is now known to none but me. Even you could no find it again. She led me through the secret passage and down the many, many steps cut in the solid rock, down, 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 her light making the steep path light before me, until we reached the dungeon of the dark death, and even that she lighted up. She led me to a spot where her dead body lay on the ground, just under the bottom of the shaft that reached only to the ceiling or roof above. Her body lay with the body of her babe, just as if they had both dropped down there and fallen asleep. I knew they were dead. I knew every bone in both was broken, though that did not appear on the outside. It was under where they struck the ground that the horror of death was. I knew also, as if I had seen it all, how she had died, how she had been entrapped to her sudden death, how she had not even suffered. There had been a swift fall, a shock, nothing, and then a wonderful coming to life in a new form. I tell you, lass, it was no dream, but a real seeing. And it was wonderful to stand there by the two crushed dead bodies and see the two living souls. I thought of the chrysalis and the butterfly, the worm and the moth, the eggshell and the bird, as I stood there between life and death and seeing both. And without any speech at all, my lass made me know how she had been betrayed to death, how, every one being gone off the place, and she alone in her hut, my lord had come to her and pretended to make it all up with her, and had asked her to walk with him in the hall of the old castle, and she had gone, and they walked up and down, until suddenly, when she was passing with her babe over the trap door they had passed so many times, he suddenly stepped back, the door fell in, and she shot down, struck the ground 200 feet below, and knew no more until she woke up in her new form, not dead, but living, never more to die. Presently she beckoned to me again, and walking before me, A form of rosy light led me back again by the way we had come, up, 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 to the upper air again. Nor did she leave me until we were back in the hut. She waved her arm and signed for me to lie down on the bed, and I minded her and did what she said. Then she stood by my bed, waving her hand to and fro, until I went to sleep. And I slept so deep and so long that it was broad daylight, with the sun shining in at the bare window, when I waked. No, it was no dream, bairn. Soon as I waked I minded all that had passed in the night, and I knowed it was no dream. I went no more out that day. At noon my lord came to the hut, the first time he had come for many a day, and he asked me, in a careless way, 'Where is that wench of yours, Goody?' And I looked him straight in the face and answered him, 'Her body and her babes lie crushed to death on the stone floor of the deep dungeon where you cast her down. But she and her child, they are in paradise.' He turned white as a sheet, and reeled in his saddle, but he quickly put on a bold face and said, 'You are a mad old beast, and before 24 hours are over your head you shall be committed to the county lunatic asylum.' And with that he struck spurs into his horse and dashed wildly away. Not too often, lass, does punishment follow fast on crime, but it did in this case. He dashed wildly off in a state of mind, I reckon, that made him unable to guide his young horse as he ought. Half an hour later he was carried hame to the castle on a shutter. The horse had thrown him and broken his neck. The title and estates they went to a distant cousin, great-grandfather of the present Earl Francis. Earl Godfrey was good to me. He and his children and his children's children have been good to me. Always good to me, although they call me mad. When my girl was missed, and the trap-door was found open, they had it that she had trodden on it, and it had gi'n way under her weight, and her death was an accident, and nobody to blame. They wouldn't listen to me, no one word. They said I was a poor, harmless creetur, crazed by the loss of my lass. They got a windlass and great chains and ropes, and then let down men until they took up my birds' broken shells and gave them Christian burial. Everybody was kind to me, only they wouldn't believe me. They said I was mad. They would have it as it was the poor stable-boy as wronged my girl. And now I hear, after more than 50 years, some un have made another story and got it into a book, how the stable-boy killed my girl and threw her body down the shaft, and was hanged for it at Carlisle. All lies, bairn. All lies. My story is the only true one." "I believe you," said Wynnette. End of chapter 46. Chapters 47 and 48 of Love's Bitterest Cup. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gaige. Chapter 47. The End of the Night. "The sky is red in the east. Go now, my bairn. Thou art a good child, and brave to dare the ghosts of the old hall, and to hear the tale of an old crone. And it is true, bairn, it is true. Do not you give faith to any who tell you it is not, and tell you I am mad." "I will not. I will believe only you. But before I go, can I do anything for you?" "Nay, bairn. Nothing, bless 'ee." "Where do you live?" "In the old hut. The hut outside the south wall, open to the lane." "I can find it. May I come to see you there?" "Ay, ay, bairn. Bless 'ee for the kind thought. Come when thou like, but dinna bring any other with 'ee. Na other might hear me so kind and mind me so well as you do." "Do you are you have you will you?" Wynnette hesitated and blushed. "Speak out, bairn. Dinna be feared. Speak out." "Then, will you have a good breakfast ready for you when you go home?" hesitatingly inquired practical Wynnette. "I shall have all I want, bairnie. Earl Francis has provided for me. Go your ways to the house now, bairnie. Your friends will be speering after ye." Wynnette took the shriveled hand of the creature and pressed it kindly before she left the old castle hall. The early June morning was breaking brightly and beautifully over land and sea as Wynnette went down the half-ruined steps that led from the castle hall to the courtyard below. She climbed over the piles of rubbish, and at length found herself on the flagged walk that led up to the west entrance of the new castle. Not a soul was yet astir. It could not have been more than half past 4 o'clock, and the servants of the castle were not accustomed to rise before 6. She went up the broad stone stairs and opened the door, which she found, as she had left it at midnight, unfastened. She passed in silently, quietly replaced all the fastenings, and descended noiselessly to her room. Her sister was still sleeping soundly. She felt no disposition to sleep. She resumed her seat at the west window, and looked out upon the morning view as she had looked on the night scene, trying to understand the adventure she had passed through. Was the old crone who had talked with her really mad? Had her only child been ruined and murdered by the wicked earl? Had she, Wynnette, really witnessed that wonderful vision in the dungeon under the castle? Or had she been so psychologized by the crone as to have been the subject of an optical illusion? She could not tell. She could make nothing of her night's experience. While she was musing over it all her thoughts grew confused, her vision obscured, and perhaps she fell asleep, for she was presently roused, as from profound unconsciousness, by the voice of Odalite calling out to her: "Wynnette! Wynnette! Child! You have never slept at that open window all night! How imprudent!" The girl roused herself and tried to recall her faculties. "I believe I did fall asleep, Odalite," she replied; but she shuddered as she remembered her night's adventure. "And you are shivering now! And you are pale and heavy eyed! Oh, my dear, what an indiscreet thing to do, to sleep with your head on the sill of an open window! You have caught cold." "Ah, if you only knew what I have caught!" thought Wynnette; but she answered: "Oh, no, I have not, Odalite. I am going to take a bath now and dress for breakfast. I am all right. How could I take a cold on such a lovely night in June?" "But you must not repeat this," said Odalite. "I don't mean to," significantly replied Wynnette. An hour later they met the family at breakfast. Wynnette was so unusually grave and silent that at length her uncle noticed her manner and inquired: "What is the matter with our little pickle this morning?" "She sat in the chair at the open window all night and fell asleep there. That is the matter," replied Odalite for her sister. "Ah, ah! That will never do. We must put a stop to that sort of practice," replied the earl. And then Mr. and Mrs. Force both fell upon their daughter with rebuke and admonition, but were soothed and mollified when Wynnette assured them not only that she had taken no harm on this occasion, but that she never meant to repeat the last night's performance again so long as she should live. When breakfast was over the family party adjourned to a pleasant morning room looking out upon the sea, and occupied themselves with opening and reading their letters, which had come in by the morning's mail. Mr. Force had letters from his farm manager and from his attorney, giving satisfactory accounts of affairs at Mondreer. Leonidas had especially good news from Beeves concerning his little estate of Greenbushes. Mrs. Force received a short note, ill spelled and worse written, from her housekeeper, but it gave good account of domestic affairs. Rosemary Hedge had a joint letter from her mother and aunt, saying that they were both in good health and giving their child plenty of good counsel. Wynnette received an old-fashioned letter from young Grandiere, which she laughed over, and refused to show to any one. In the midst of this occupation they were interrupted by the opening of the door and the entrance of a footman, who touched his forehead with a grave air, and stood in silence. "What is it?" inquired the earl. "If you please, my lord, it is Old Silly," solemnly replied the man. "Old Zillah?" "Yes, my lord." "What of her?" "If you please, my lord, she is dead." "Dead?" "Yes, my lord." "Old Zillah! Why, when did she die?" "If you please, my lord, we don't know. Kate, the under-scullery maid, who carried her some breakfast this morning, found her dead on her bed." "It was to have been expected. She was nearly a century old. It is well." CHAPTER XLVIII OLD ZILLAH "She has come to life," said Wynnette, quoting the words of the departed woman. All looked at the girl in some surprise. With all her oddities, Wynnette was not used to make such speeches as that, and now, for the first time, they noticed that Wynnette's face was very pale, with dark circles under her eyes. "What is the matter with you, my dear?" inquired her mother. "Nothing at all, mamma," answered the girl. "She sat by the open window late last night and fell asleep there, and slept until I woke her up this morning. That was quite enough to make her ill," Odalite explained. "Nay, my dear, in such fine June weather as the present, and in such pure air as ours, it would hardly have hurt her had she slept outdoors," said the earl. "But what do you mean, my dear, by saying that our poor old Zillah has come to life?" he inquired, as he turned to the girl. "Nothing heterodox, uncle. Nothing but what we hear from our pulpits on every Easter Sunday morning," she replied. "Oh!" he exclaimed. "Only, in this case, the truth seems to be very marked. A woman nearly 100 years old must have been nearly dead for many years, and now has certainly come to life. Ah!" "Nothing new, uncle, please. I never said anything new in my life." "Then you put old truths in a very new way." "Eternal truth, uncle, eternal truth, plain to gentle and simple, to young and old, plain as the sunshine to all who can see, hidden only from them who are blind, or who choose to keep their eyes shut. Hum! Truth that neither the aged, the invalid, nor the bereaved can afford to disregard, at least. And now, my dear, I must leave you, to inquire into the cause of Old Zillah's sudden death. Will you come with me, gentlemen?" Mr. Force and Leonidas arose to attend him. Le gave the invalid the support of his strong young arm. And so the three men passed out of the room. "Mamma, did you know anything about this wonderful old woman?" inquired Wynnette. "Very little, my dear. Only the years of my earliest childhood were passed here. Old Zillah was an object of terror to me. Partly, perhaps, because she wore a man's coat over her skirt and a man's hat on her head, and partly because she had the reputation of being a wise woman or a witch. She never came to the castle, and I never saw her except by chance, when I went with my nursery governess to walk or ride. She never came near me or spoke to me. I think I should have gone into fits if she had." "How old were you then, mamma?" she inquired. "I do not know when I first began to hear of Old Zillah, or when I first saw her. She was the shadow and the terror of my dawn of life. I was but 4 years old when I lost my mother, and then my father left this place, taking me with him, and he went to his estate in Ireland, Weirdwaste, on the west coast." "Weirdwaste! What a name! Did you live long at Weirdwaste, mamma, dear?" "Yes, many years alone there with my governess. My father was traveling on the continent." "What sort of place was it, mamma?" inquired Wynnette. And Rosemary and Elva drew their chairs nearer to the sofa on which their mother sat, to hear her answer. "It was an old manor house on the inland end of a long, flat, dreary point of land stretching into the Atlantic Ocean. At high tide the entire cape, to within a few rods of the manor wall, was covered by the sea, and day and night the swash of the sea was heard." "How lonely you must have been, mamma, with no one but your governess and the servants," said Elva. "But perhaps you had neighbors," she added. "No, no neighbors at all. There was no one within miles of us but the poorest Irish peasants, who were tenants of my father. The estate was vast in extent of territory, but poor in soil. The land steward lived in the manor house, to take care of it and of me. They kept 2 old servants, a man and a woman, an old horse, and an older jaunting car. That is how I lived at Weirdwaste." "Oh, what a lonely life! How long did you live there, mamma?" "Until I was nearly 15 years of age, when my health failed, and the surgeon from the nearest town was called to see me, and thought my case so serious that he wrote to my father, who was in Paris. My father then came to see me, took me and my governess to Brighton, and established us in elegant lodgings on the King's Road." "That must have been a most delightful change. How long did you stay in Brighton, mamma? And where did you go next? Not back to Weirdwaste, I hope?" said Wynnette. "No, not back to Weirdwaste. I have never seen the dreary place since I left it," replied the lady, in a low voice, but with paling cheeks and troubled brow. "Mamma, love," said Odalite, rising, "will you come with me into the library now, and help me to translate the passage in Camoens we were talking about yesterday?" "Yes, dear," replied the lady, rising to follow her eldest daughter. "Well, I'm blest if that isn't playing it rather too low down on a fellow, Odalite. I mean, it is very inconsiderate in you to carry off mamma just as she is telling about the days of her youth, for the very first time, too. Bah! Bother! What a nuisance!" But Mrs. Force and her eldest daughter had passed out of the room. The death of Old Zillah caused quite a commotion in the castle and in its neighborhood. Notwithstanding her age, or perhaps because of her great age, her death came as a surprise, not to say as a shock, to the community. She had lived so long that it almost seemed as if she must always continue to live. "Why, it's like as if the old tower of the ruined castle itself had fallen," said one to another. People came from near and far to see the remains of the centenarian, and to get her real age, and hear some facts of her life. And all the cruel old legends were raked up again, until the whole air of the place was full of fetor, fire, and brimstone. The people reveled in the moral malaria. The mortal body of the oldest retainer of the House of Enderby at length found a peaceful resting place in Enderby churchyard. No peeress of the realm ever had a larger funeral than this pauper, at least so far as the number of fowlers went. It was not until night on the day after the funeral that Wynnette slipped away from the family circle and went to the housekeeper's room to hear the promised story. "I will hear both sides," she said to herself, "though I do believe Old Zillah's version to be the true one." She found the good woman seated at a small work table and engaged in knitting. "Well, Mrs. Kelsey, how are you to night?" inquired Wynnette, as she took the offered seat beside the dame. "Thanky, miss, I'm none the better for the worriment of this week," replied the housekeeper. "You mean the funeral?" "The whole on't, miss. The greatest crowd as ever was every day this week, not even honoring the Sabbath itself, but coming more on that day than any other. And the talk, and the gossip, and the raking up of old scandals, until I was soul sick of it all. And all because a wise woman, over 100 years old, was found dead in her bed. Warraloo! How else and where else should she have been found dead, I'd like to know." "But you have had a night and day of rest, and I hope you feel recovered." "Rest, is it, miss? Recovered, is it? Not very much of either. It is dead beat I am." "I am sorry to hear that. I was hoping that you would feel well to night, and be inclined to tell me the story of the pretty maiden you promised." "Oh, ay, well, there is not so much to tell. And now the old creature as hung on so long is gone, I don't mind telling it so much. The girl's soul may have rest now that her mither doesn't harry it up." "Yes, I hope it will," said Wynnette, in a conciliating tone. "You will tell me the story now?" "Yes, and whatever other story you may hear about it will be false. For I know that you will hear other stories, if you haven't heard 'em already. There's plenty of 'em going around, I tell you, and no two alike. But only I have the truth, for I have it straight from my mother, who had it from hern, so it must be true. And no other story could be." "But I suppose if Old Zillah were alive, she also could give the real facts," ventured Wynnette. "She? Least of all in this world could she tell it. For not only did she fail to tell the truth, but she told a many mad fancies, for she was about as mad as a March hare. Saw visions and talked with departed spirits, prophesied future events, and all that, she did. Yes, miss, she has been that a way ever since I knowed her, and as I have heard tell, was that way ever since she lost her daughter." "Tell me about her daughter." "I'm a gwine to. Well, you see, it seems the feyther had been under gardener, and he died. And then the widow was given the use of a little hut in the outside of the old castle wall, on the lane. And there she lived and brought up her only child, Phoebe. They were both employed in the poultry yard. Phoebe grew up beautiful as an angel, so beautiful that everybody who happened to meet her stopped to look at her, so beautiful that her beauty turned her own head as well as her mother's. While she was yet a child, all the gentry that met her gave her half crowns, and even half guineas, for the love of her fair face. At least, so 'twas said, and so 'twas handed down. And people used to make such foolish speeches about her as that she was lovely enough to turn the head of a king. These speeches did turn her mother's head, and her own as well. All the young men were in love with her, but she scorned them all for a poor little imp of a stable boy, an orphan, as had been her playmate all her life." "I did hear that it was for the sake of the young earl she flouted the others," said Wynnette. "Oh, yes, I dare say. That was one of the stories that went round. That was false. The young earl did come down to celebrate his coming of age, and his mother and sisters came with him, and made up their minds to stay with him, which they might do until he should marry, in which case they would have to go to Kedge Hall, an old manor house on the moors. So my lady seemed to think the longer she could keep my lord, her son, from getting a wife, the better it would be for her and her girls. Among the men staying at the castle was an artist. He was to paint a picture of St. Cecilia for the countess, but he wanted a model. One day my lady, out driving, happened to see Phoebe, and had her up to the castle to sit to the artist. And then the mischief began. My lord fell in love with her, fairly went out of his senses for love of this beautiful creature, who didn't even know how to read. And my lady encouraged the folly and wickedness. My dear, gentlefolks were not particular in those days. Here, she said, was a beauty right on his own land, the child of his tenant, one of his own born slaves, bound to do his will, who might amuse his fancy and keep him from marriage for many a year. She never feared such a thing as my lord marrying the girl. Such folly was not to be thought, and never was thought of by either of them." "But," said Wynnette, "I heard that the earl had married her." "Stuff and nonsense! He never dreamed of such a thing. He was the proudest man alive, and he was engaged to a duke's daughter. But the crazy old mother and the silly young girl fancied that he even might do that for the love of Phoebe's fair face. So the poor stable boy was thrown over, and the young earl was received. The boy got madly jealous, and so, months after, when the hapless girl was found dead at the bottom of the shaft in the old castle, the stable boy was arrested on suspicion of the murder." "I know," said Wynnette, "and the guide to Enderby Castle says that he was tried and convicted and hanged at Carlisle. But I have heard that contradicted." "Yes, it is contradicted. I do not know the truth. It has been so long ago that no living person can remember it, now that Old Zillah is gone." "She could," said Wynnette. "Oh, yes, she could; but she got facts and fancies so mixed up in her poor old brain that no one would dream of trusting to her stories. If you could ever have had the chance to see her, miss, you would have seen how very mad she was." Wynnette did not think it necessary to explain that she had seen Old Zillah and heard her story. To no one could the girl breathe one word of her terrible night in the old castle. Sometimes she was half inclined to believe that she had really fallen asleep on the window sill and dreamed it all, from the moment of horror and amazement when the spectral eyes lighted up the loopholes of the old wall to the moment when she was awakened by the voice of her sister. Wynnette was more bewildered than she liked to own herself to be, bewildered as to the dream or the reality of her terrible night, bewildered as to the relative truth or falsehood of the two conflicting stories she had heard of the beautiful peasant girl's fate. What is dream and what is reality? What is fact and what is fable? She asked herself continually. End of chapter 48. Chapter 49 of Love's Bitterest Cup. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gaige. Chapter 49. Brother and Sister. Meanwhile, there was another member of the family circle fully as much perplexed as was Wynnette, though upon another subject. The Earl of Enderby could not reconcile all his knowledge, his lifelong knowledge of Angus Anglesea, his schoolmate at Harrow, his classmate at Oxford, his brothers in arms in India, the brave, tender, faithful friend and comrade of many years and many lands, with this thief, forger, bigamist, described under his name by Elfrida Force and all her family. "Elf," he said to her one day, as the two sat tete-a-tete in the library, all the other members of the family circle having gone out for a stroll on the top of the cliffs, "Elf, my dear, I have had some trials in my time, not the least among them my inherited malady, dooming me to an early death and barring me from marriage." "Oh, Francis, don't say that. Medical science has reached such perfection, you may be restored to health. And you are not yet middle-aged. You may marry and be happy," said the lady, almost in tears. "No, Elf. No, dear, it is impossible. But it is not of my infirmities I wish to speak now. I would rather never mention them, much rather forget them, if that were possible. I only meant to say that of all the trials I have ever suffered, that of hearing such news of Anglesea as you have told me is the most painful. I cannot forget it. I think of it constantly, by day and by night. I am very sorry that we had to tell you, Francis." "Elf, you knew Anglesea in those early days when we both came down to spend our holidays at Brighton with you." "Yes, I remember." "You knew him then. Could you have believed such villainies of him?" "No, not then." "Nor could I then, nor can I now. I wish the man were in England. I would go to him and make these charges face to face, and put him on his defense. I shall never rest until I put him on his defense. Do you not believe what we have told you and proved to you, that this man is a thief, a forger, and a bigamist, even on his own showing?" "I believe that you believe it, my dear. And I believe as much of it as I can believe in the absence of the accused. And when a man is accused of crime, he should be present and be put on his defense. I wish to charge Anglesea to his face with these felonies, and to hear what he has to say." Elfrida Force looked so coldly on her brother in answer to these words that he hastened to say: "See here, my dear, consider how I loved and trusted that man from my youth up. He was older than myself. He was my mentor, my guide, philosopher and friend. I could no more have doubted his honor than I could have doubted yours." The lady winced. "Think of it, my dear. Do you wonder that I am sorely perplexed at what I hear of him, or that I wish to hear what he has to say for himself? Suppose any one, Anglesea, for instance, before I had heard a word against him, when I loved and trusted him most, had come to me and said, 'Your sister, whom you love and honor so much, has forfeited both love and honor.' Elfrida, heavens, what is the matter?" suddenly exclaimed the earl, as the lady sank back pallid and fainting in her chair. "It is—" "Go on," said the sister, recovering herself with an effort. "Nothing is the matter. You were saying that if Anglesea had come to you with slanders of your sister, what would you have done?" I should have knocked him down and kicked him out, first of all, as a preliminary to challenging him. Be sure I should not have believed his story told behind your back, and I am certain you would not wish me to be less just to Anglesea than to you." "Very well. I do not believe he will ever dare to show his face in England again. But if he should, and you should meet him, make the charge that we have made and see how he will meet it. Of course he will deny all, and accuse his accusers of conspiracy." "It is all very painful and very perplexing, but do not think otherwise than that I will stand by you and yours, Elfrida, under all circumstances." "I am quite sure that you will, dear Francis," replied the lady, and their talk drifted to other topics. "I shall miss you very much, sister, when you go abroad," he said at length. "But I shall not go, Francis. I shall remain with you. I have been over the continent so often that I do not care to see it again," replied the lady. "What do you say, Elfrida? You will not go on this tour with your husband and children? You will stay here with your invalid brother? That is good news to me. But what will your husband say to such a plan?" "Of course I had a talk with Mr. Force before making up my mind. We talked it over last night. He thinks just as I do, that it is best for me to stay with you." "He is very kind. Very, very kind. But you will both give up much for the sake of a poor, sick man." "No, indeed. I really do not care for the continental tour. I have made it so often." "But there are so many changes since you made it last." "Yes, there is gas instead of lamplight in all the cities, railway trains instead of diligences on all the highways, and sons on the thrones of their fathers. I am content to know of these things. I do not care to see them." "But Mr. Force! He will miss you." "Dear brother, our honeymoon was passed 22 years ago. Young love has matured to old love, or rather to love that can never know age nor absence. It is not necessary that we should always be looking into each other's eyes to make sure that we are happy in our union." "Yet I dare say you never tried it. I dare say you were never apart from each other for 24 hours in your married life." "No, we never were." "That is why you talk so glibly of a separation for months. You had better not try it, Elfrida. You had better go with your husband and party, or make them stay here with you." "Not so, Francis. I will not leave you, now that I've come to you after so many years of separation. And, on the other hand, I will not keep the other members of our family party from their travel. It is necessary that young people should have the advantage of this continental tour, and it is desirable that they should have the protection of their father, as well as of their cousin. So I must stay here, and they must go. If Mr. Force or myself should grow lonesome during the season of separation, he can come here to me. Neither Abel nor myself should feel the slightest hesitation in leaving our young girls in the care of their cousin, Leonidas." "My dear, you have some strange, new, and, I suppose, American ideas of the liberty allowable to young people." "To our own young people, who certainly may be trusted with liberty," replied Elfrida Force, with a smile. "Well, of course, of course, I am human and selfish enough to be very glad that you are to stay with me instead of going with your party." The brother and sister then talked of some details relating to the intended tour, until the tete-a-tete was broken into by the return of the walking party. It was the 1st of July that the tourists, consisting of Abel, Leonidas, Odalite, Wynnette and Elva Force, and Rosemary Hedge, set out from Enderby to London, en route for Dover and Paris. They were to have a 3 months' travel over the continent, and were to return on the 1st of October, unless they should receive advices from the earl to meet him and his sister at Baden-Baden, where he often went in the autumn for the benefit of his health. And with this understanding, and with the promise of an incessant fire of letters from both sides, the friends parted. Leonidas, it should have been explained, on account of his 6 years' active service at sea, serving double turns, as he put it, had got a 6 months' furlough, beginning from the 1st of May. He would, therefore, not be due at the Navy Department to report for orders until the 1st of November. When the large party had left the castle, life at Enderby settled down to the calmest, not to say the dullest, routine. Elfrida Force spent her time in waiting on her invalid brother, reading the old black-letter tomes in the library, and in writing letters to her absent family and reading their letters to herself. Sometimes she walked or rode abroad, but always in company with her brother. Sometimes the vicar of Enderby came and dined with them, and played a game of chess in the evening with the earl. 2 or 3 times a week the village doctor looked in to see his chronic patient, and once, on his advice, a telegram to London brought down a titled court physician to see the invalid. Beyond these no company came to Enderby, and no visits were made by the earl or his sister. The castle was too remote and too difficult of approach for mere visits of ceremony, and the sick earl was too much of a recluse to encourage or enjoy the visits of his neighbors. So the lives of the brother and sister, in the absence of their relatives, passed in almost monastic seclusion. And so July, August, and half of September passed. It was on the 16th of the last mentioned month that the village practitioner, after a long visit and talk with his patient, sent a telegram to the London physician, who came to Enderby by the night's express. The result of the consultation by the sofa of the invalid patient was this: that the earl must depart for Baden-Baden as soon as possible. Preparations were immediately made for departure. Among other precautions, Elfrida Force did not forget Wynnette's dear dog. She made a visit to the kennels, where Joshua had found friends among his canine, as well as his human companions, and there she spoke with the grooms and gave them some money in advance, and promised them more on her return if she should find Joshua well and hearty. "I think if anything were to happen to the dog, my daughter Wynnette would almost break her heart," she said. "Bless 'ee, my lady, nothing shall happen the brute but good treatment. He's a dog as any one might grow fond on. And as for we, why, we fairly dotes on him, my lady. And so do him on we. Look, my lady! Hi, Joshua!" The dog came bounding from some distant spot and jumped upon the groom with every demonstration of joy, until he saw his mistress, when the old love and loyalty immediately asserted itself, and he sprang from the groom to the lady. Elfrida Force caressed him to his heart's content, and then, to divert his attention, she emptied a small basket of cold meat that she had brought for the purpose, and while he was busy with a well-covered beef bone, she patted his head and slipped away. On the morning of the same day the earl sent off a telegram to Mr. Force, at the Hotel d'Angleterre, St. Petersburg, merely saying: "We leave to-morrow for Baden-Baden. Write to us at the Hotel d'Amérique." Late in the evening he received the following answer: "We shall join you at the Hotel d'Amérique." The earl handed the telegram to his sister, saying: "I told you the bridegroom would be impatient. The bridal honeymoon was sweet, no doubt, but what was that to be compared to the honeymoon of the silver wedding, Elf?" She was about to retort by asking him what he could know about it, but remembering in time the pathos of her brother's life, and not quite knowing what else to say, she remarked that the 25th anniversary of her wedding was yet 3 years off, and then she kissed her brother and bade him good night. Fraught with destiny, the Civil War brought great changes, and brought with misery final happiness to the Forces, as will be related in the third and final volume of this series, under the title of "When Shadows Die." This is published in uniform style and price with this volume. The End. End of chapter 49. End of Love's Bitterest Cup, a sequel to Her Mother's Secret, by E.D.E.N. Southworth.